Let's take a look back at the last 10 years of NBA trade deadlines. With Giannis on the market and all this talk about trades and the deadline that could create some serious fallout for other teams in the NBA, let's look back starting at 2016 and work our way on back up to where we are now. So if you want to look from 2020 forward, skip ahead in this video. We'll start here at 2016. So some of the big trades, a lot of these guys, I loosely followed the NBA, but I was a lot younger here. So looking down at the bottom here, Lance Stevenson to the Grizzlies for Jeff Green. Those guys were a lot younger then. Markieff Morris, still in the league, to the Wizards for Chris Humphrey, Juan Blair, and a future first. So we're seeing a little bit of first-round pick action here. I think some of the bigger ones here, Anderson Varejao for a future first. A lot of these guys that you see get moved in the trade deadline, and I think this is kind of a theme. It's a lot of salary dump. It's a lot of flipping salaries, maybe 1 pick, 2 picks in the future. And yeah, 2016 was relatively mild in terms of huge names. Brian Roberts for cash. I'm going to be honest, I have no idea who Brian Roberts is. Call me a casual here. 2017, we got some more names that I'm familiar with. Lou Williams, who eventually became the 6th man of the year, later down the line with the Clippers, to the Rockets for Corey Brewer and a future first. Seems like it was a pretty solid deal at the time for the Rockets, getting back a great player. Roy Hibbert, at the end of his career, traded to the Nuggets for a conditional 2019 second-round pick. Would have loved to see that turned into. But this is pre-Nikola Jokic. They needed center help at the time. Thunder with Anthony Morrow, Cameron Payne and I'm not going to try to pronounce that name, to the Bulls for Taj Gibson, Doug McDermott, and a 2018 second. A lot of guys that are still around with Cam Payne, Taj Gibson, maybe the oldest guy in the Knicks bench there in a second. Seems like it was a pretty sweet deal for the Bulls. Cam Payne, of course, is still a big player in this league. Not a whole lot, just looking down at this. Some more names, but no big deals. We're going to start to see these big deals later as they pop up into the 2020s. So, 2018, this is a lot more. 30 players dealt here in this one. We'll start at the bottom. Elfrid Payton to the Suns for a 2018 pick. Not a whole lot to say there. You look up, here we go. The Cavs, this was the end of the Cavs run here, 2018. They're trying to do whatever they possibly can to bolster this LeBron lineup. So in this trade, they dealt Jay Crowder, Derrick Rose, and second-round draft swaps with Iman Shumpert as well. And they got George Hill, Rodney Hood, and Joe Johnson. I think George Hill was the bigger one. I remember he played pretty well for that Cavs team in the run, but they lost him on Shumpert. It hurts to lose Jay Crowder. I think he was a big part of the Suns' championship run back into 2020. Jay Crowder was probably a better player after he left, but the Cavaliers were trying to piece together just a capable roster around LeBron, and this was after they lost Kyrie Irving, so getting George Hill back was big for them. Looking at Emmanuel Mudiay, this was a guy, wow, these are some names here. Emmanuel Mudiay, he was like a top 5 recruit, and then he got drafted to the to the Nuggets. Didn't turn out to be a whole lot, so the Nuggets traded him to the Knicks for a second-round pick, and they got Doug McDermott back, I think. So it was just kind of swapping guys around, seeing if a better home could have worked out for him. I think the Cavs were the biggest here. Here we go. Dwayne Wade in exchange to the Heat. Wow, this is right. So Dwayne Wade, that's right. He went out to the Heat, or to the Cavs, and then he went back to the Heat. That's really funky, just getting dumped back for the second. I, of course, remember that Cavs time for Dwayne Wade, but you got to think, it almost looks Photoshopped today. 2019, we start to get a lot more trades. 34 players. You can see just kind of slowly, incrementally, more and more. This is the Cavaliers heavily in this trade market again. just, I think, salary dump and flipping guys around. Mavericks traded Harrison Barnes to the Kings. This was Harrison Barnes before he made the big run with the Kings. Of course, because Barnes was part of that big playoff run just a few seasons ago for the Kings. So that's how he ended up there. Of course, he was drafted to Golden State and bounced around. Looking up here as well, this was Grizzlies, a big trade. Marc Gasol to the Raptors. This was the team that got Marc Gasol, I think in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, and they made the finals run. This was the piece, Marc Gasol, the vet, the savvy vet at center over there with Serge Ibaka, that took this team all the way to the finals. And they got it for CJ Miles, Jonas Valanciunas, DeLon Wright in a second. So it seemed like this is a very big win-win trade for both teams. Gasol, of course, a huge piece of the finals run. Maybe the biggest piece dealt as we look back in these 10 years, well, so far that we've looked back at, in terms of actual impact to win. Of course, there'll be some more guys in the future, some bigger and bigger names, but Jonas Valanciunas turned out to be a great player for the Grizzlies, who got a lot of good years out of him, eventually to New Orleans and then to Washington. But how about that one? A great deal there. Going up, not a whole lot for the rest of these guys. Stanley Johnson, Thon Maker, Nikola Mirotic, not as... I'm just reading through this. Yeah, there's a lot of guys that cash considerations and salary dump. Here's one, Markelle Fultz to the Magic for Jonathan Simmons, a protected first-round pick in a second. Markelle Fultz actually ended up playing better in Orlando, of course, but never able to remotely come near the hype that he had out of college. It's just a crazy bust story, and a lot of these guys ended up, a lot of the early first-round picks that have a lot of talent, that everyone knows have talent, ended up getting shipped out on the deadline a few years after their first home doesn't work, and we end up with a new team. Here's another 30 players dealt. You look down here in 2020. Yeah, we'll go up to some of the bigger ones here. The Timberwolves, they traded Andrew Wiggins in a first round pick and a second round pick to the Warriors for D'Angelo Russell, Jacob Evans, and Omari Spellman. This ended up being a fantastic trade for this Warriors team, who ended up winning the championship in 2022. Wiggins was a huge piece of that. He had an all-star season there. Just a great deal all around. Wiggins, of course, the number one pick, traded on draft night for Kevin Love with the Cavaliers. He was drafted by the Cavs. LeBron came back. They got Kevin Love, a known all-star contributor. Wiggins, of course, turned out to be that later down the line, but it took the right situation and a lot of other stuff, and he just never really came into the most of his potential in Minnesota. So send him to the Warriors. The Warriors are able to get a lot out of him. Grizzlies traded Andre Iguodala and Jay Crowder and Solomon Hill to the Heat. This is more salary dump. Here's one. Pistons traded Andre Drummond to the Cavs for Brandon Knight, John Henson. A lot of these, you can see a kind of a theme for a lot of these is teams getting positions of need and some help. So it's salary, it's positions of need, and maybe they're resetting. So you're swapping second-round picks. Most of this here you can see is just all second-round picks except for this Andrew Wiggins deal that helped the Warriors. Actually, this 2020 deal right before COVID, eventually they're going to draft James Wiseman here, but it was kind of a losing season all around, and I think this was the season that Curry got really hurt there for the Warriors. Got a lot more trades. 48 players dealt in 2021. We're starting to get into the 2020 weeds of a lot of guys getting traded. So Pelicans get rid of J.J. Redick. He goes to the Mavs. He played a little bit on the Mavs and I think retired at the end of this season. Maybe played one more year, the end of his career. Here's a big one. This was a huge trade for, well, let's talk about this one first. JaVale McGee to the Nuggets for Isaiah Hartenstein And Hartenstein eventually becomes a huge player for the Knicks down the line, but that's at the start of his journeyman a little bit before he gets signed to a big deal with the Thunder. Aaron Gordon to the Nuggets for R.J. Hampton, Gary Harris, and a future first. I think this 2025 first-round pick turned, I think it might have turned into Anthony. No, it wouldn't have been Anthony Black. But nevertheless, how about this deal for the Nuggets? They get Aaron Gordon, essential part of their finals run. It seems like Aaron Gordon is just the classic piece. It's one more piece to get over the hump for the Nuggets. They drafted a lot of guys, made one essential trade for the dunk contest just champion out there. But also, Aaron Gordon became a huge closer, a huge guy alongside Jokic, just a defender. He can help defend the rim. He can play some small ball five. He can stretch. He can shoot. Compliments Jokic so well. A lob threat. Just, he loved playing there as well. And going back up the list, Raptors traded Norman Powell to the Blazers. Norman Powell eventually gets back up into a 20-point-per-game scorer. He went to the Blazers and then out to the Clippers afterward. Austin Rivers from the Knicks to the Thunder. And we just have a lot of players swapping around here. There's a lot of guys, but of course the biggest deal I remember in this one was that Aaron Gordon deal in 2021. 2022, 35 players, continuing that up trade direction here. I think this was this huge 4 or 5 team deal. The Bucks traded Dante DiVincenzo to the Kings, Rodney Hood to the Clippers, Serge Ibaka to the Bucks. Yeah, this is a lot of team deal. Marvin Bagley got traded away from the Kings to the Pistons. This was Bagley. He, of course, got drafted second ahead of Luka Doncic. Yikes. To the Kings, and then he went over to the Pistons, where he had a little bit of a career resurgence. But, man, you hate to see him go. This was the end of a lot of hope for the Kings. They, of course, made the run the next year in the playoffs, but without Bagley and without a few other guys, this team just kind of hit its ceiling and eventually forced to move on. This is a big one as well for Kristaps Porzingis. The Mavs acquired him in an off-season deal, but they traded him out to the Wizards for Spencer Dinwiddie and Davis Bertans. Porzingis was just so injured, and they couldn't get him to be that number 2 alongside Luka that they really wanted. And, of course, we had this next trade for James Harden to the 76ers, a little bit of a wash James Harden to the 76ers. Of course, this was James Harden's arc of where he gets fat, plays poorly, and then gets traded as his value drops a little bit. But they traded him for Andre Drummond and Ben Simmons. I remember Skip Bayless was over there on TV the next day saying Ben Simmons was going to have a resurgence out there. He did not have a resurgence out in Brooklyn. But they got a first, and I think it was 2 firsts, a protected future one. Overall, pretty good for the 76ers. They eventually ship him back out to the Clippers for less. He played well for the 76ers, but just with the beads, injuries, and more, they couldn't quite get it done. Here we go, 49 players in 2023. This is more like it. We had some huge deals. Mike Conley to the Timberwolves is a huge one. D'Angelo Russell to the Lakers. Russell Westbrook to the Lakers. The Lakers got rid of Russell Westbrook. He goes out, kind of gets into his 6-man role. James Wiseman to the Pistons. Gary Payton back to the Warriors. Gary Payton, of course, only playing well for the Warriors. Kevin Durant to the Suns in 2023. Jalen McDaniels and to the 76ers, Josh Hart to the Knicks, Eric Gordon to the Clippers, and a few more. That was a huge trade deadline as well. 42 players here in 2024. You can just see our numbers going up and up and up and up. We got a lot here to look at. This was more of pieces trade. I remember this one. I think the biggest one, PJ Washington to the Mavericks. Washington and I believe Gafford and Grant Williams were all parts here for the Mavericks that ended up being pretty good. A big part of their conference finals run a few years down the line. You can see a lot of these other guys' pieces and second round picks, as we've talked about. 2025, 47 players this past season. NBA fans have become accustomed to it. One of their teams, somebody they know that's big time, is getting traded. We had a lot last year. Yusuf Nurkic to the Hornets. James Wiseman to the Raptors. We've seen Wiseman get shipped out in just about every trade deadline deal. A lot of these good contracts they're shipping out. Kyle Kuzma ends up in Milwaukee. That one certainly didn't work out, as now it's looking like Giannis is trying to request a trade and get out. Marcus Smart out to the Lakers, I think. Or I guess Marcus Smart went to the Wizards, that's right, and then he went back to the Lakers at the start of this season. It's always tricky to catch up here. But, of course, Jimmy Butler as well, the biggest one. Heat traded Jimmy Butler to the Warriors for Wiggins, Anderson, and Davion Mitchell. Honestly, a pretty good trade for both teams. You think Wiggins has been still a rotational contributing player for the Heat. And Butler, he made a good run there in the playoffs, but he's hurt now, and the Warriors are in a bit of a sticky spot. Are they going to try to trade for Giannis? Are they going to try to send Kuminga? That's the question. And now as we look ahead at today's trade deadline, Giannis is on the market. Every other domino is going to depend on that one. We've seen these past years when Durant's traded, when Harden's traded, that kind of sets the market. And all these other teams get involved. You see Kevin Durant, we've got about 5 or 6 teams involved in different ways to make the salaries work, to pick up second-round picks, to really help these contending teams get an extra piece or two. It's really, those big trades are everything. So we will see what kind of trades we have. I thought it'd be fun to recap a little bit from the last 10 years, looking back at what these trades have been. Of course, I needed a refresher myself. And yeah, excited to see what happens here, and I'll be here to cover it.